Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into the warm, golden haze of ancient Greece, drifting past olive trees, marble columns, and the salty breeze off the Aegean Sea. But we're not here for the postcard. No, you're here for something stranger. You're about to live the life of a man who claimed numbers had souls. A man whose name survived 2,500 years mostly because of a triangle you haven't touched since high school. But there's more. Much more. And by the end of this journey, you'll have walked barefoot through mystery schools, peeked into sacred caves, and maybe, just maybe, understood why Pythagoras wasn't just a mathematician. He was a whisperer of the cosmos. And yes, you probably won't survive this without a mild identity crisis. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your city and local time in the comments too. I love seeing where, and when, you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin, inconveniently, with a rumor. They say your mother, Pythagoras, was approached by a god in a dream. Some say Apollo, others Hermes. Depends who's selling the scroll. But either way, he whispered that her child would be divine. The kind of divine that doesn't throw lightning bolts, but something stranger. He would understand reality's code. So you're born on the island of Samos, around 570 BCE, with the kind of pressure most kids don't have until their fourth unpaid internship. Your father, Nisarchus, is a merchant, probably sailing around with dyed fabrics and questionable amphorae full of wine. But he believes the prophecy. He gives you a name that means, he who is announced by the Pythia, the oracle of Delphi. Yeah. No pressure. Your early years are oddly silent in the records. That's either because nobody cared to write it down, or you were already so strange that people avoided eye contact. Either way, you grow up surrounded by salt air, temple smoke, and the rhythmic songs of Greek priestesses. Samos is rich in trade and culture, but it's also under the thumb of a man named Polycrates. A charming tyrant with a love for warships and showy executions. You grow into a quiet, observant boy. You love the stars, really love them. The kind of love where you'd rather stare at constellations than play knucklebones with the other kids. You start to see patterns everywhere. Not just in the sky, but in sound, in shadows, even in how people move. And this obsession doesn't stay a secret. Local teachers catch on. Some accounts say you study under Hermodamas of Samos, a respected philosopher with the patience of a stone Buddha. Others claim Thales and Anaximander, the big boys of early Greek thought, had a hand in shaping you. Historians still argue whether that's poetic exaggeration or just ancient name-dropping. Here's what we do know: you become that kid. The one who doesn't just ask why the sky is blue, but insists on calculating the angle of the sun to find out. You start building your life not around what is, but what should be, if the universe really has an order. And while the other teens are debating sports and marriage prospects, you're drawing triangles in the dirt and mumbling about divine ratios. Your family doesn't stop you. In fact, they quietly start bragging. The neighbors think you're odd, but your father insists you're chosen. He invests in your curiosity like it's a trade route. And you start asking bigger questions. What is the soul made of? Can numbers explain the divine? Do we return after death, or just dissolve? These aren't bedtime thoughts. But you think them anyway, even when it keeps you awake. You start to believe that reality is written in symbols. That truth, real, unshakable truth, is out there, hiding in the folds of math and myth. And then there's the whisper. The one that keeps returning in dreams, in waking thoughts, even in birdsong. It tells you, leave. Leave Samos. Leave comfort. Leave the predictable. Because truth isn't lounging by the harbor with figs and goat cheese. It's hiding somewhere harder, stranger, more sacred. But you can't just pack up and go. Polycrates isn't exactly handing out permission slips to aspiring philosophers. So you bide your time. You learn what you can. You keep your questions quiet. And then, one night, you decide you've had enough of this island-shaped cage. You look up at the stars, one last time. You feel the breeze off the sea. You trace a triangle into the sand. And just like that, you're gone. You trudge inland along winding goat paths and over scrubby hills, the ocean fading behind you. Each step kicks up little clouds of dry dust that cling to your sandals, like the island doesn't want to let you go. But your mind is already far ahead, picturing distant cities, ancient temples, and secrets older than language. You're chasing something big. Something that probably doesn't exist in any one place. Still, you chase it anyway. You're barely a man, somewhere in your early 20s, and already the world feels both too small and too wide. You leave Samos just as its ruler, Polycrates, is growing dangerously bold, seizing ships, building fleets, cozying up to Persia. You don't know it yet, but leaving now probably saves your life. History will remember Polycrates as a glittering tyrant who meets a very sharp and ironic end. You're going to live a stranger story. Your first real stop is likely Miletus. It's the Silicon Valley of ancient philosophy, full of thinkers who make temples look boring. Here, you encounter Thales again, if he's still alive, or at least his influence. He's the man who first suggested that water is the origin of all things. Oddly specific, but back then, that was revolutionary. You don't buy it entirely. Water's important, sure, but you suspect there's something deeper. Less wet. Something abstract. Something countable. You start to form a theory, all is number. It's not a metaphor to you. It's a literal truth. Everything, mountains, moons, music, even dreams, can be understood if you just find the right numbers. And to find them, you need to go further. Egypt calls to you. And let's be honest, it's hard to resist. Egypt is old even by your standards. It's the land of monuments, priests, and mystery so dense they could crush skulls. You hitch rides on merchant ships, cross dusty miles, and finally arrive somewhere near Heliopolis, a city that basically serves as the brain of the Egyptian priesthood. Now, being a Greek in Egypt is complicated. Greeks are considered curious at best, annoying at worst. But you're not there to steal secrets, you're there to earn them. And you're patient. You humble yourself. You listen more than you speak. Eventually, you win their trust, or at least enough of it to be let inside the outer rings of their learning. You begin studying with the Egyptian priests, men who've spent lifetimes memorizing rituals and watching the stars. You learn that numbers aren't just tools, they're sacred. They don't just measure things, they mean things. You study arithmetic, geometry, and astrology, but also the math of resurrection, of burial, of cosmic harmony. You watch as sacred architecture reflects precise ratios. You hear whispers of sacred numbers that mirror celestial bodies. You start to believe that numbers aren't invented. They're discovered. Like ruins waiting in the dark. You also learn that the Egyptians, while advanced, keep their deeper truths encoded. Hidden. For the initiated only. You wonder, what are they still hiding? And why? Historians still argue whether you spent months here or years. Some say you were even initiated into the mysteries of Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom. Others claim you merely learned from the fringes. But all accounts agree on one thing: when you leave Egypt, you are not the same. You're taller. Quieter. more intense. And behind your eyes is a glow, a kind of obsessive fire that never quite goes out. Unfortunately, the world is not waiting with open arms. When you try to leave Egypt, things get dicey. You're caught in the crossfire of one of history's lesser-known tiffs, the Persian conquest of Egypt. You may be captured, some say by Cambyses II's forces, and taken east as a learned prisoner. A respected one, but a prisoner nonetheless. Which leads you to Babylon. Ah yes, Babylon. Another ancient jewel. Where Egypt worships mystery, Babylon celebrates systems, astrology, calendars, architectural precision. Here, you likely meet Chaldean sages, who teach you how the stars can be mapped, how time can be sliced, and how omens can be read like footnotes in the sky. And while you're supposed to be in chains, you're actually in heaven. You absorb every scrap of knowledge you can, especially when it comes to numerical order. You begin to see connections. Not just between shapes and numbers, but between sound and number. Between body and number. Between soul and number. You're becoming something strange now. Not just a philosopher. Not just a mathematician. Something hybrid. Something haunted by truth. You even begin to believe that numbers have ethical properties. That the universe is not only mathematical, but moral through its math. This is not your average eureka moment. This is cosmic fever. You wake in the middle of the night sometimes, heart pounding, because you've dreamed of numbers arguing. Or because the geometry of a temple suddenly makes sense and then doesn't. You're no longer just learning, you're becoming. And then, one day, you walk out of Babylon, alone. You've learned what you can. You've seen order behind chaos. But you're not content. Not yet. The road west stretches in your mind like a question mark. You're ready to start giving answers. You walk west, but you carry the east inside you. The roads are lined with dust, superstition, and small, forgettable towns. But your eyes, they're different now. You don't just look, you measure. The arc of a bridge, the curve of a crescent moon, the rhythm of a chant drifting from a roadside shrine. Every pattern whispers back to you. And though you're returning to Greek lands, you're not going home. Samos is still ruled by Polycrates, still glittering with tyranny and the kind of luxury that tastes like metal. Going back now would be like trading your soul for figs. So, instead, you head to Italy. Specifically, to Croton. At the time, Croton is a thriving Greek colony on the southern tip of the Italian peninsula. Think of it as the Miami of Magna Graecia, sun-soaked, influential, and a little obsessed with perfection. Athletes train here for the Olympic Games. Philosophers gather in marble courtyards. And as always, rumors move faster than ships. By the time you arrive, your reputation has sprinted ahead of you. People whisper about the tall, quiet Greek with Babylonian stardust in his eyes and Egyptian geometry in his veins. They say you can predict eclipses. That you speak with animals. That you glow in the dark. You don't. Probably. But what is true is that you arrive with an idea. A very dangerous one. That idea is, truth should be lived, not just known. You're done being a passive student. You want to build something, a living philosophy. Not just a scroll of dusty theories, but a breathing, chanting, bean-abstaining community. A brotherhood. A movement. So you start slow. You give public lectures, carefully worded, warmly delivered. You talk about harmony. About justice. About the divine order hidden beneath the mess of daily life. And Croton listens. Especially the upper crust, nobles, merchants, even politicians. Your words aren't just clever. They're comforting. they make the chaos of the world seem solvable. And just like that, the Pythagorean brotherhood is born. Except it's less a brotherhood, and more of a cult. But hey, history uses those terms like seasoning. You gather followers. Men, mostly, but some women too, like Theano, who is said to become your student, your partner, maybe even your wife. Historians still argue whether she was a mathematician, a philosopher, or just really good at tolerating silence. Speaking of which, your brotherhood has rules. Rule number 1, absolute silence for 5 years. No speaking until you've proven you can listen. Seems harsh, but honestly, might improve most group chats. Rule number 2, share everything, money, food, thoughts. No secrets. No ego. Rule number 3, no beans. Yeah. Beans. You ban them completely. Not just from diets, but from life. Don't touch, don't plant, don't eat. Scholars have theorized everything from, they cause flatulence, to, they resemble human embryos, to, they're spiritually impure. Honestly, you never really clarify. You just say, no beans, and move on. Quirky as it sounds, people join. They shave their heads, wear simple clothes, and rise at dawn to study music, math, and morality. You teach them that numbers are more than tools, they're beings. That the number 1 is the origin of all things. That 2 is diversity. That 3 is harmony. That 10 is the perfect number, the sum of 1, 2, 3, and 4. And here's the kicker, you convince them. Because when you speak about it, it doesn't sound mad. It sounds inevitable. Like remembering something you always knew but forgot. Every lesson is wrapped in metaphor, ritual, and rhythm. You speak in parables. You teach that the soul is immortal and reincarnates until it becomes pure enough to escape the cycle. That the universe is a symphony. That math is the key to divine liberation. This is no classroom. It's a monastery. A lab. A launchpad for mystical math astronauts. The brotherhood grows. Slowly, then rapidly. You begin influencing local policy, offering moral guidance to rulers, even drafting laws. Some say you saved Croton from civil unrest by encouraging moderation and justice. Others say you just creeped out the opposition with your bean ban and 1,000-yard stare. You become a kind of philosopher king in exile. A guru with a chalkboard. And yet, not everyone is charmed. Some whisper that your teachings are too strict. Others resent your growing influence. A few former students even claim that the whole silence thing is a power play, and that maybe you're hiding something. Still, you press on. You've created something real, a living, breathing system of thought. And for the first time, the world seems almost understandable. But you can feel it, can't you? That little tremor under the marble tiles. Trouble's coming. The numbers don't lie. It starts, as most revolutions do, with a sound. A twang. A string, pulled taut and plucked, vibrating in the still air of an early Croton morning. You're sitting cross-legged, eyes half closed, in the echoing calm of your temple school. Before you, a young acolyte, head freshly shaved, robe spotless, is tuning a lyre. You raise a hand. He stops. You walk over, silent as breath, and pluck the strings yourself, one by one. You note their tension, their length, their pitch. Then, with a half-smile and a gaze like lightning under clouds, you begin to speak. The cosmos, you say, sings. Your students lean in. You explain that music isn't just art, it's math. That the distance between notes corresponds to ratios. That the harmony of sound reflects the harmony of numbers. A string half the length of another will produce a note an octave higher. A 3-to-2 ratio sings a perfect fifth. To most, this is a party trick. To you, it's the skeleton of the universe. The idea that math lives inside music electrifies your disciples. They start experimenting with tones, frequencies, instruments. Soon your halls are filled with the sound of vibrating strings, humming bowls, and whispered debates about whether a liar can prove the existence of God. You take this further. You start mapping the intervals, between notes, between stars. Yes, stars. Because if harmony governs music, why not the heavens? This is where things get speculative. You propose that the planets themselves move according to mathematical ratios. That as they orbit, they produce vibrations, too subtle for human ears, but real nonetheless. You call it the music of the spheres. Historians still argue whether you meant this literally, or if it was metaphor for cosmic order. But in your mind, there's no distinction. Poetry is physics. And the universe? It's a perfectly tuned instrument, plucked by the divine. You start giving lectures about numbers as personalities. The odd numbers, active, masculine, creative. The even, passive, feminine, reflective. It's numerology with a side of Jungian archetypes, centuries early. You believe that health, too, is a kind of harmony. That illness is dissonance between soul and body. You even assign numbers to body parts, as if healing can be done with equations. Some students begin to pray to numbers. Others try to diagnose each other like broken instruments. You don't stop them. You're building not just a philosophy, but a cosmology, a full-spectrum worldview where math is theology, and every ratio has moral weight. And then one of your students asks the question you've been waiting for. If the cosmos is built on perfect ratios, what happens when a number doesn't fit? Ah. The irrational numbers. This is where your dream begins to tremble. One of your followers, maybe Hippasus, though records are muddy, tries to calculate the square root of 2. A diagonal line across a perfect square. Simple enough. Except, the number doesn't end. It doesn't repeat. It refuses to behave. It's irrational. This deeply disturbs you. You've taught that all things can be reduced to whole numbers or their neat fractions. That reality itself is number. But this number has no ratio. No pattern. It's a kind of numerical wildness. You don't like wildness. Some say you try to suppress the discovery. Others say Hippasus is expelled, or worse. There are darker tales, that he's taken out on a boat, and tossed into the sea. Drowned by math itself. Did that happen? Historians still argue whether Hippasus existed at all, or whether he's a stand-in for every disobedient thought your system couldn't swallow. Either way, the damage is done. The myth of perfect numerical order has cracked. You try to recover. You double down on teachings, refine the rituals. You demand more silence, more discipline. But the questions keep circling like hawks. And still, you hear the music. Every night, you step outside and look at the stars. You trace invisible chords from planet to planet, note to note. You still believe. Even if the ratios don't always cooperate. Even if some numbers escape the net. You have to believe. Because if the universe isn't ordered, if the music doesn't play, then all you've built is a very polite hallucination. And deep down, you suspect you're not alone in this fear. Even your most loyal students glance sideways when the lyres go out of tune. Even the stars seem just a little quieter. Croton hums in the background like a quiet warning bell. At first, it's subtle, fewer fresh faces at your morning lectures, more half-finished chants, fewer students kneeling with the same ecstatic devotion. The benches aren't empty, but the light in their eyes has dimmed just a notch. Just enough for you to notice. But still, the machine of your brotherhood rolls forward. The rituals continue. The teachings deepen. You adjust, adapt. When the stars fall silent, you turn inward. When the numbers misbehave, you remind everyone that perfection was never about appearances. Except, in your mind, it was. The whole time. And perfection has started to crumble. You try to hold on. You take your message into the city. You counsel Croton's leaders on justice and moderation, applying the same sacred ratios to politics. Four virtues, courage, wisdom, temperance, justice, like four perfect points of a sacred polygon. You try to sculpt society like one of your geometric diagrams. At first, it works. Your advice brings calm. Civil unrest eases. People begin referencing your name like it's a spell. The Pythagoreans become not just students, but advisors, lawmakers, influencers. Quietly, you've embedded your thought into the political bloodstream of Croton. And yet, this brings eyes. Not all of them friendly. The common folk, the ones who aren't invited to your sacred circles, who aren't allowed into your temple after dusk, who really miss beans, start to talk. They whisper about your power. About how the rich favor you. About how your students walk around with the smug glow of people who believe they've cracked the code to existence. You become, in the eyes of the discontented, not a philosopher, but a symbol of elitism. Of arrogance. Of exclusion. One night, a group of citizens gather outside the Brotherhood's compound. They're not holding torches, yet, but their voices are sharp, and their faces are tired of sacred numbers. You come outside. You speak calmly. Of balance. Of unity. Of harmony between soul and society. They don't buy it. Because while you're talking about harmony, they're thinking about hunger. About inequality. About how the Pythagoreans, with their chants and diets and silences, seem more interested in stars than stomachs. Historians still argue whether it was politics, religion, or just garden variety jealousy that sparked the revolt. But it happens. Croton turns. It starts with scattered heckling during public lectures. Then graffiti. Then a riot. Then a fire. Your school, your sanctuary, is attacked. Chants turn to screams. Symbols are smashed. Scrolls trampled. And for the first time in years, numbers can't help you. You run. Not proudly. Not mystically. Not with some dramatic farewell. Just, fast. Into the dark. Some students flee with you. Others disappear. A few stay behind, believing the flames are a test. They're not. They're flames. Your sanctuary becomes ash. You watch from the hills, silent, wrapped in a cloak that smells of old parchment and regret. Below, your life's work curls into blackened smoke. And for the first time, you ask yourself a question you've avoided for years. Was this ever real? Was it truth that you taught, or a beautiful illusion? You walk away. Not because you want to. Because you have to. Because you're no longer welcome in the city where you built your dream. Now you're something else, a philosopher in exile. A fallen mystic. A fugitive of math. The roads ahead stretch wide and wild. Your followers are scattered, your name now passed in whispers, some reverent, some bitter. And you, Pythagoras, once high priest of the divine ratio, are just a man again. Alone with his thoughts. And you realize, perhaps for the first time, this, too, is a ratio. One man. Against the silence. You drift. There's no grand plan now, no chorus of students echoing your words back to you in breathless awe. Just the crunch of gravel underfoot and the low murmur of your own heartbeat, steady, but questioning. You head north at first, then inland. The map is in your head. The destination, less so. The days blur. You speak when needed. Trade a few coins for bread. Sleep under trees or in the corners of temples too polite to refuse you. Every once in a while, someone recognizes you, wide eyes, a quick bow, a whispered Pythagoras, like they're not sure you're real. You don't answer. You just smile, or nod, or vanish into the next road bend. You become a ghost. A myth in motion. And yet, something strange happens. Your ideas don't die. They take root. Quietly. In places you never expected. A former student opens a school in Metapontum, speaking in riddles and citing your geometry. Another, halfway across the sea, starts drawing chalk diagrams in the dirt for curious fishermen. A merchant claims he cured his migraines by sleeping with 10 beans beneath his bed, don't ask. One even swears she hears the harmony of the cosmos in the crashing of waves. You never told them to do this. But you did teach them to listen. And they did. In a way, you've become viral. Ancient Greek viral, that is. Meanwhile, you, ragged and reduced, start teaching again. Informally. 1 or 2 pupils at a time. No temples. No robes. No chants. Just conversations beneath fig trees and sketching shapes with a stick in the dust. You talk about balance. Stillness. That truth lies in patterns. That everything is music if you know how to listen. You leave out the bean stuff. Probably for the best. One day, you meet a shepherd boy who's trying to build a better pen for his goats. The corners are crooked, and the whole thing leans like it's drunk. You kneel, press your finger into the dirt, and draw a right triangle. 3. 4. 5. He looks at you like you've just summoned fire. You pat his shoulder and move on. And just like that, your theorem lives again. No classroom. No fanfare. Just knowledge passed like a secret handshake between the stars and the dirt. The truth is, you've changed. The exile has burned off the parts of you that craved perfection. That clung to symbols like shields. What's left is leaner, quieter. A man who no longer fears the irrational. Who sees the cracks in the ratios, and accepts them. You begin to suspect that maybe harmony isn't a rigid equation. Maybe it's the tension between chaos and order. The flicker of silence between notes. And yet, you still hope. Hope that somewhere, someone is still drawing shapes in the sand, still believing that the universe speaks in numbers. You never return to Croton. There are rumors, of course, that the city regrets its violence. That some of your students snuck back and built tiny schools underground. That the Pythagoreans are regrouping, rebranding, maybe even getting less weird about legumes. But you stay away. You choose Metapontum instead, a quiet town with fewer politicians and more stars. You live simply. Sleep deeply. Teach quietly. You plant gardens. Measure their growth. Whisper to the leaves. And at night, when the world falls still, you sit on a flat stone behind your house and stare at the sky. The constellations are as they always were. Unchanging. Distant. Comforting. You hum a little, tuning an imaginary string. And for just a moment, you hear it. A note. Not from lyres or lips. But from everything. The sound of being. The music of the spheres, faint but certain. You smile. It's still playing. Even without the temple. Even without the brotherhood. Even without you. Your house in Metapontum isn't much. Stone walls. A modest roof. A garden where geometry meets tomatoes. It's the kind of place that doesn't announce itself, tucked on the edge of the town like a polite afterthought. But inside, you're quietly rebuilding something. Not a movement, not a school, not yet, but a rhythm. A return to the heartbeat of truth. The neighbors know you as the quiet old man who speaks softly and plants with precision. Children call you the number mage, and sometimes they sneak to your window just to watch you draw shapes in the dust. You don't mind. Their awe is real, and awe, you've learned, is rarer than reason. Your days follow a new equation: rise with the sun, observe, teach, reflect, sleep. You're more selective now. Not everyone gets your time. Only those who ask the right kind of questions. Not, what is the Pythagorean theorem, but, why does it matter? Still, a few of the old crowd find you. They arrive looking different, older, yes, but also, weathered. Less starry-eyed, more skeptical. These are the survivors. The ones who ran from the fire. They enter your home quietly, sit cross-legged on the floor, and begin again, not as students, but as seekers. They share stories of scattered Pythagoreans. Some went underground. Others went freelance, teaching bits and pieces. One runs a bakery and explains triangles to customers using pastry. Another became a wandering healer, using ratios to mix herbs. You listen. You nod. And then, gently, you remind them that the math was never the point. It was the meaning behind the math. The shape behind the shape. The why behind the what. You begin writing again. Not volumes, just fragments. Aphorisms. Riddles. Odd little lines scribbled on wax tablets or carved softly into wooden boards. Things like, do not speak unless you can improve the silence. Number is the highest good. The soul is a circle, bound by nothing. Some of your students start collecting these sayings. They'll later be called symbola, symbols. Passwords. Teachings encoded like tiny puzzles. And then, of course, there's the triangle. Your old friend. The 3-4-5 triangle becomes a kind of signature. Your name is attached to it now, whether you meant it or not. People credit you with its discovery, though, if we're honest, Babylon knew about it centuries before you did. But you made it into something sacred. Something eternal. It becomes more than a formula. It becomes proof. Proof that truth hides in the obvious. That the universe, chaotic, cruel, spinning madly through space, still bends, sometimes, into perfect shapes. But there are those who never forget the power you once held. Even in Metapontum, there are whispers. That your brotherhood is reviving. That you still command loyalty. That your silence holds influence. You're watched, occasionally. Politely. By men who speak with city officials. By the curious. By the afraid. You shrug. You no longer chase power. But you no longer hide either. You do perform one ritual, though, every year, on the same day. You walk alone to a clearing just outside town, where a great olive tree leans over a wide stone. There, you sit. You draw a circle in the dirt. Then, without a word, you erase it. Your students don't ask what it means. Maybe it's a reminder. Maybe it's an invitation. Maybe it's just a circle. Historians still argue whether this annual ritual was symbolic of death, rebirth, the cyclical nature of truth, or if it was your way of sneaking in a private joke about irrational numbers. You never explain. You never do anymore. Words come slower these days, but silence speaks louder now. And in your silence, something remarkable happens. Your students start to lead. One begins teaching others, not by lecture, but by listening first. Another starts writing, interpreting your aphorisms in newer, stranger ways. A few begin chanting together again, not as ritual, but as resonance. Not for power, but for peace. Your philosophy has become a frequency. A subtle vibration. Not something you teach. Something you tune into. And so, at the age when most men fade, you deepen. Not louder. Not grander. Just clearer. Like the tone of a string pulled just right. The sun hangs lower these days. You notice the way it folds shadows across your garden, long, slender, like fingers stretching from the sky. Everything is slower now. The earth turns gently, the wind sings softer, and even the birds seem to pause longer between songs. But your mind? It's still sprinting across constellations. You've become obsessed with the movement of the heavens. Not just as myth, not just as metaphor, but as music. You sit on your stone bench and watch the planets crawl across the sky, drawing invisible arcs through the night. You imagine them strumming strings as they go, each orbit a note in a vast cosmic symphony. You call it the harmony of the spheres. To most, it sounds poetic. Beautiful nonsense. But to you, it's a literal truth. The distances between celestial bodies correspond to musical intervals. Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, the Moon, they don't just move. They sing. Not with air. Not with sound. But with number. You tell your students that if human ears were finely tuned enough, if we hadn't been dulled by meat and noise, we could hear it. The grand music. The breath of the universe itself. Historians still argue whether this was philosophy or early astrophysics. Whether you were laying the foundation for Kepler and Galileo or just talking to stars because people were boring. But your followers? They believe. They build devices, monochords, tuned strings stretched across boxes, to simulate what they think the planets might sound like. Low, humming tones for Saturn. Bright, fast pulses for Mercury. Some even hum these notes during meditation, hoping to harmonize with the universe's secret song. It gets weird. One student refuses to speak for a full month because he claims the moon told him silence was the most accurate pitch. Another starts wearing a series of copper rings he says are resonance amplifiers. You don't correct him. Instead, you smile. Because the madness isn't madness. It's devotion to beauty, to order, to the idea that existence is more than chaos. Still, not all agree. You get visitors now. Curious skeptics. Priests. Philosophers from nearby cities. They sit with you, ask questions, challenge your ideas. One particularly bold visitor calls the harmony of the spheres a nice bedtime story for children afraid of disorder. You don't argue. You just look at him. And then, without a word, you place your hand on a monochord, press a string exactly halfway, and pluck it. The room hums with a perfect octave. You adjust the string to 2/3. A fifth. 3/4. A fourth. Every note, a ratio. Every vibration, a truth. And you say, if sound can obey order, why not stars? He doesn't laugh. He leaves quietly. You also begin to reflect more on reincarnation. You've believed for years that the soul is eternal, that it returns again and again, refining itself, shedding ignorance like old clothes. Now, in the quiet of Metapontum, the belief sharpens. You speak often of purification, of ascending through lives not just as punishment, but as progress. A soul begins in ignorance, then learns discipline, then harmony, then love. And finally, if it's lucky, it escapes. You hint that you've lived before. That once, you were a Trojan warrior, a priest, a fisherman who could count the waves. One student asks you, "What if this is your last life?" You shrug. Then I must listen carefully. More and more, your teachings blur lines between science and spirit. You assign numbers to virtues, colors to tones, metals to emotions. You're mapping the soul as if it were a city made of light and integers. Theano helps you. Yes, she's still here. Whether wife, partner, or simply your most brilliant disciple, she's become your voice when you're too tired to speak. She transcribes your thoughts, teaches new students, and, some claim, softly corrects your math when you drift a little too far into metaphor. She's grace where you are fire. Your bond is quiet, but real. A different kind of harmony. And all the while, the brotherhood reshapes itself. Not as a cult. Not even as a school. But as a movement of seekers, scattered like seeds. You don't lead them anymore. Not officially. But every now and then, someone brings news. Another school opened in Sicily. A merchant in Rhodes reciting your aphorisms at banquets. A former student composing music using planetary ratios. Your voice is multiplying. Softly. Without force. Like a song you forgot you sang, but someone else remembered. And even as your breath grows shallower, your vision sharper, and your legs weaker, you still look up. You still hum. Because the music, it never stopped. You just got better at hearing it. It starts, not with a scream or a collapse, but a whisper. A quiet tension enters the room. Not from your bones, those have already been stiff for years, but from your followers. They sense it. The inevitable shift. You're slowing. Not dramatically. Not tragically. Just, undeniably. Your steps take longer. Your thoughts, though still clear, sometimes drift mid-sentence, floating off like threads in the wind. You forget the name of a student you once praised for perfect circle drawings. You sit longer after meals, your fingers curled into the edge of your seat, as if the weight of your knowledge finally wants to rest. But it's not just age pressing in. Something else is cracking. It begins, again, with a number. One of your newer students, flush with enthusiasm and entirely too confident, presents a discovery. It's about square root 3 this time, another irrational number. Another mathematical outlaw that refuses to obey the rules of tidy ratios. He's excited, almost breathless, expecting praise. Instead, you close your eyes. It's not the number that frightens you. You've made peace with irrationality. It's the way your students look at it, like it's beautiful. Not dangerous. Not destabilizing. But liberating. And for the first time, you realize they no longer fear disorder. Not the way you did. You were born craving symmetry. Order was your religion. But your students, they're children of chaos now. And they smile at the wildness in math. You nod politely. You even say, "Well done." But inside, something shudders. You're losing them. Not because they don't love you, but because they've outgrown the need for a fixed system. They're remixing your ideas. Softening the edges. Questioning even your sacred 10. You taught them how to think. Now they're doing it without you. And then, there's Hippasus. Yes, him. or at least, the memory of him. His name, once buried, denied, erased from the Brotherhood's records, is suddenly surfacing again. Quietly. In murmurs. In footnotes. In footpaths. Some of the students whisper that he was right. That the irrational is not a threat but a doorway. That your reaction to his discovery was not wisdom, but fear. They don't say it to your face. But you hear it anyway. The Brotherhood, once defined by loyalty and reverence, is shifting under your feet. Some want more openness. Others want less ritual. A few have even started eating beans again. Publicly. You sit beneath your olive tree and exhale a long, tired sigh. You remember when it was simpler. Numbers were good. Silence was sacred. Beans were forbidden. Now, it's all up for debate. You're becoming a relic. And worse, a symbol. A figurehead people quote, reinterpret, disagree with. You're alive, but already half myth. The worst part? You trained them to do exactly this. To question. To think. And now, here they are, tearing down the temple with your own tools. You retreat a little. Fewer lessons. More walks. More evenings by the sea, listening for a music you're not sure you still hear. And then it happens. A student, bright, bold, and just reckless enough, writes a treatise proposing that numbers are not absolute, but relative. That reality changes based on perspective. That truth flexes. You don't correct him. You don't even respond. You just walk out into the garden. You stare at your triangular trellis. And for a brief moment, you wonder if you were wrong. Not about everything. Just about how tidy it all was supposed to be. Historians still argue whether you wrestled with this deeply, or if you simply let it go. Some say you died peacefully, your beliefs intact. Others say you suffered a quiet, internal collapse, watching your life's work evolve into something unrecognizable. But what is known, what's undeniable, is that in your final years, you grew silent again. Not by rule. By necessity. Words could no longer carry what you wanted to say. So you let the music speak. The stars. The silence. The numbers that refused to obey. And in that silence, you felt it again. The pulse. That soft, trembling vibration beneath everything. The rhythm of a world that never promised perfection, but always offered beauty. And so, you remained. Rooted in your garden. Surrounded by those who questioned you, loved you, and, perhaps most painfully, no longer needed you. The air is thick the day it ends. Not dramatically, not with lightning or temple bells or the flutter of divine robes descending from Olympus. Just heat. Dry, unwavering, clinging heat that presses down on Metapontum like a silent decree. You wake slowly, your breath shallow. The bed is stiff beneath you, your hands folded across your chest as if preparing for something. Not death, no, you've rehearsed that in your mind too many times to be afraid. Just closure. There are 3 stories about how you die. Each of them absurd in its own way. The first says you starve yourself to death. Not as suicide. As discipline. As a return to purity. You simply stop eating, sitting in the lotus position in your garden until the body gives way and the soul lifts off. Some say it takes days. Others, weeks. They picture you surrounded by followers, eyes wide, waiting for you to disappear in a beam of light. Romantic. Impractical. You liked figs too much for that one to hold water. The second version is more dramatic. A mob, angry and bitter, storms the house of one of your students. You flee, again. You run through fields and vineyards, your old bones protesting every step. Eventually, you reach a field of fava beans. You stop. You refuse to cross. Your old rule still holds, no beans. Not even to save your life. And so, the mob catches you. And ends you. The irony is not lost on historians. The third version. You die quietly, in Metapontum, surrounded by your students. Theano at your side. A slow fade, like the final pluck of a string long after the hand has gone still. You close your eyes. And let go. Historians still argue which version is true. Some say all of them. Some say none. It doesn't really matter. Because your death, like your life, isn't a single point. It's a pattern. A shape. A convergence of symbols. Your funeral is quiet. No state fanfare. No philosopher's procession. Just your students, gathered in concentric circles, heads bowed. A few recite your aphorisms. One plucks a monochord softly, letting the vibration settle into the ground like roots. Theano plants a tree. A fig, maybe. Maybe an olive. And at its base, she buries a small wooden tablet. On it, etched in soft script, all is number. And now, your ideas fracture, like light through glass. The brotherhood does not end with you. It splinters. Some disciples remain in Metapontum, quietly maintaining the rituals, the silence, the bean ban. Others travel. Spread. Translate. Adapt. In time, the rituals fade. But the math remains. Your name survives not in prayers, but in textbooks. The Pythagorean theorem becomes immortal. Used by architects, engineers, students who curse your name during late-night homework sessions. Your triangle outlives your temple. And still, the myths grow. You're painted as a prophet. A demigod. A magician who could tame rivers and speak with stars. Later philosophers treat you as a gateway figure. Plato, Aristotle, even Renaissance mystics invoke your name like an ancient password. You're no longer just a man. You're an idea. And like all ideas, you warp with time. There's a strange comfort in that. Because death was never the end of your story. Just a transformation. A rebirth, as principle, as legend, as proof that even in a messy, irrational world, there are moments of beautiful, impossible order. And if anyone asks what happened to Pythagoras, just say, he found the music. And then, he joined it. The dust settles, but the echo does not. After your death, something strange begins to happen. Your followers, once unified by your voice, begin to split. The brotherhood becomes a diaspora of minds and hearts, each carrying a piece of you like a sacred shard. They scatter across the Greek world, and with them, the gospel of numbers. Some try to stay true to the old rules. They sit in silence, measure their breath, fold their bedsheets in perfect triangles, and still shun the beans. They keep the fire burning exactly as you tended it, never daring to alter the shape of the flame. These are the purists. The traditionalists. The quiet. But others. They improvise. They strip away the rituals and keep the equations. They teach your geometry in public markets. They write commentaries. They throw out the silence, the symbols, the strangeness, and focus on what works. The triangle. The music. The soul as circle thing gets repackaged for broader audiences. And your name. It starts popping up in places you never imagined. Scrawled in margins. Scribbled in scrolls. cited in debates between men who never met you, never knew your voice, but are absolutely certain what you meant. Your legend becomes a kind of currency. Useful. Malleable. Sometimes true. Over the decades, then centuries, the Pythagoreans become a movement without a center. A decentralized echo. Some morph into mathematicians. Others into mystics. A few slip into politics, muttering about virtue and harmony while drafting city laws. And then there's Plato. Yes, that Plato. He comes along a century after you, but he's obsessed. He cites your teachings often, sometimes accurately, sometimes with a dramatic flourish that would have made you wince. He builds entire philosophies on your foundations. The idea that reality is structured by ideal forms. That the soul is immortal. That education is a path to the divine. You gave him the scaffolding. He built a palace. And once Plato elevates you, there's no going back. You become a pillar of Western thought. Even when people forget the bean ban, the sacred ratios, the reincarnation stuff, they still know your name. They still draw your triangle. They still associate math with mystery. Centuries pass. Scrolls are lost. Cities fall. Temples crumble. But your theorem, it survives. In Arabic translations during the Islamic Golden Age, your work is preserved, refined, expanded. Mathematicians like Al-Khwarizmi and Al-Kindi credit you as a stepping stone to algebra, to astronomy, to the very shape of science itself. In the monasteries of medieval Europe, monks etch your triangle into the margins of illuminated texts, gold leaf tracing its angles like halos. During the Renaissance, scholars resurrect you as a symbol of harmony between science and spirit. Artists place you in frescoes. Architects design churches based on your proportions. Composers whisper your name when building harmonies. And all the while, the world keeps measuring. The triangle gets taught to soldiers building fortifications. To sailors charting coastlines. To students trying to make sense of the way shapes work in a three-dimensional world. Your idea, simple, sharp, elegant, crosses continents, cultures, and ages. And even though no one chants your aphorisms anymore, even though the brotherhood is dust, the pattern holds. You taught them to look closer. To listen for the hidden rhythm. To ask if maybe, just maybe, the universe has a favorite shape. And every time someone draws a right triangle, every time they solve for that third side, every time they look at a problem and whisper, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. They're not just solving a math problem. They're speaking your language. Whether they know it or not. Centuries drift by like leaves on a quiet river. You, or rather the idea of you, never stops floating. Even as your original brotherhood fades into whispers and footnotes, your legacy persists, fossilized in schoolbooks, resurrected in chalk, quietly humming beneath the surface of civilization. You're no longer a man in these stories. You're a presence. A half-smiling ghost watching from the back of every geometry class. But there's a cost to becoming a myth. The details blur. Your voice, once soft, precise, and burning with meaning, becomes harder to recognize. One generation says you were a sage. The next says you were a crank. Another says you were a mathematician who wore robes and performed magic with numbers. Someone even suggests you were a son of Apollo, born of divine math. You become a meme before memes existed. Some say you could hear the music of the stars because your soul was tuned perfectly to the cosmos. Others claim you taught birds to sing in scale. One particularly creative account suggests your golden thigh glowed in the dark. Yes. Really. A glowing thigh. Historians are still arguing whether that was metaphor or just poor lighting. And yet, beneath the spectacle, your influence runs deep. Not just in math. In everything. The idea that reality is structured, that there's a hidden order beneath the surface, starts to shape more than equations. It begins to reshape how people think about truth. Your impact spills over into medicine, where healers apply numerical ratios to understand the human body's balance. Into architecture, where builders use your theorem to plan everything from temples to tombs. Into art, where painters experiment with proportion, balance, and sacred geometry. Even in music, your obsession with harmony echoes forward. Composers begin to view scales and intervals not just as sound, but as structure. As math you can hear. And slowly, a strange fusion takes hold. Science and mysticism. Logic and mystery. All tied together by one consistent idea, that there is meaning in measurement. By the time the Enlightenment rolls around, the world starts to get skeptical of mystics and oracles and glowing thighs. Rationality is in fashion. The occult. Not so much. But somehow, you stay relevant. Mathematicians continue to use your name. Not for your reincarnation beliefs, not for your vegetarianism or your celestial lullabies, but for that clean little equation. A superscript 2 plus B superscript 2 equals C superscript 2. You become the patron saint of triangles. And yet, in strange corners of the world, your stranger teachings linger. In secret societies. In esoteric clubs. In Renaissance laboratories where alchemists trace your sacred tetractys, a triangle of 10 dots that symbolizes the harmony of the universe, the structure of the soul, the unity of all things. They meditate on it. Chant about it. Swear oaths to it. Even now, whispers of Pythagoreanism crop up in places you probably wouldn't expect: Kabbalistic texts, Masonic rituals, fringe quantum philosophy. You've become modular. People take what they want from your legacy. The triangle. That's safe. That's taught in every school on Earth. But the soul as number. The music of the spheres. The idea that the cosmos breathes like a chord struck across infinite time. That part never really died. It just went underground. Carried by mystics. Reawakened by dreamers. Preserved by the kind of people who stare too long at the night sky and swear they hear something. And maybe they do. Maybe it's your voice. Or maybe it's the echo of something you spent your whole life listening for. A pattern. A pulse. Proof that beneath all the chaos, all the noise, all the irrational numbers, there is still harmony. You die. And yet, you don't. Because here's the odd part, no one can quite agree on what happened to you. You'd think a man who made such a stir, who gathered disciples and silenced cities and mapped the movement of the heavens, would at least have a reliable death story. But no. Instead, you get options. Option 1, you're cornered by an angry mob, angry at your influence, your strange rituals, your unsettling popularity. You run. But your escape path leads straight through a bean field. You stop. You refuse to cross. Because beans are impure. Because they hold souls. Because their roots tangle underground like the underworld's fingers. So the mob catches up. And that's the end. Option 2, you retire peacefully in Metapontum. The fires of youth now just warm embers in your gaze. Surrounded by loyal students, you slip gently into the next life, whatever that means. A good death. Quiet. Symmetrical. Option 3, you ascend. That's right. Some say you didn't die at all, but simply left. Dissolved into the cosmos like steam rising from a cup. Your soul, having been purified through lifetimes of geometry and discipline, finally slipped its mortal tether and was absorbed into the music of the spheres. Ascended Pythagoras. Cosmic triangle ghost. Historians still argue which tale to believe. But what's more fascinating is how uncertain they are. There's no grave. No official inscription. Just competing stories, each reflecting a different need. Some needed a martyr, others a sage, others still, a legend. And perhaps that's the point. You were never supposed to end neatly. You were the men who tried to systematize the universe and then had to admit that some numbers refused to play along. So it makes a poetic kind of sense that even your death refuses closure. What's certain is what came after. Your students, scattered and weary, begin to mythologize you almost immediately. They whisper about your glowing thigh again. They say you could tame eagles. That you remembered your past lives in full. One claims you once predicted an earthquake with nothing but a whiff of sea air and a smudge on a sundial. Your death, or absence, doesn't end your story. It amplifies it. Your triangle becomes a rune. Your aphorisms become scripture. And the tales, strange as they are, serve a purpose. They wrap your ideas in wonder. They turn math into magic. They make your teachings feel alive, whispered not just in classrooms, but in temples, towers, and tea houses. Some stories get ridiculous. There's the one where your soul leaps into a dolphin. Another where your voice is heard coming from a cave centuries later. One particularly theatrical account has you reincarnated as a golden-robed prophet who rides a chariot pulled by lions. You would have rolled your eyes. Or maybe you would have smiled, because myth, like math, follows patterns. But here's the wildest part. Through all the distortions, something true survives. Not the glowing limbs. Not the bean paranoia. But the feeling that numbers aren't just quantities, but qualities. That reality might hum in key. That somewhere between the chaos and the silence is a rhythm that makes sense of it all. Even if we can't always hear it. So your name floats forward, across centuries. Sometimes a whisper. Sometimes a theorem. Sometimes just the letter P on a chalkboard, right before a formula that's about to make a student groan. But in that letter, in that shape, in that echo, you remain. Still teaching. Still listening. Still tuning the universe. Centuries roll on, peeling layers off civilizations like wind over sand dunes, but your triangle refuses to be buried. You'd be amused, really. Because after everything, after temples and chants and cosmic lyres, it's the math that endures. Not your sacred rituals, not your reincarnation theories, not your dietary restrictions or coded aphorisms. No, what clings hardest to the bones of history is your right triangle. Good old A superscript 2 plus B superscript 2 equals C superscript 2. It outlives empires. It sneaks into the Islamic Golden Age, where mathematicians like Al-Khwarizmi and Al-Biruni study and rework your ideas, expanding them far beyond what you could have imagined. Arabic texts preserve your theorem in lovingly inked margins, keeping it safe while Europe forgets how to spell. Then, the Renaissance. And oh, do they love you? You become the perfect bridge, half mystic, half mathematician. A man who whispers to stars and scribbles proofs with equal authority. Artists invoke you in drawing bodies. Architects use your ratios to raise cathedrals. Composers study your harmonic intervals to tune harpsichords and design choirs. And scholars, they squabble endlessly over what you meant. Were you a mystic who happened to like math? Or a mathematician who wrapped his calculations in mysticism to keep the rabble interested? Historians still argue. In the Enlightenment, your spiritual side is quietly swept under the rug. European thinkers, now allergic to incense and prophecy, keep the theorem and toss the rest. You're reduced to a clever man with a sharp beard and an even sharper grasp of triangles. Fine. Let them simplify. Because the strange thing is, your weirder ideas don't die. They just go underground. In esoteric societies and philosophical salons, the whispers continue. The Tetractys, your sacred triangle of 10 points, appears in Freemason rituals, Rosicrucian texts, and cryptic engravings. It becomes a symbol of perfection, of ascent, of the hidden order beneath the chaos. Your name dropped by Newton, invoked by Kepler, and buried deep in the fine print of modern science. Not always accurately, not always kindly, but always there. And then, centuries later, a quiet revolution. Computers. Binary. Logic gates. Algorithms. And just like that, the world starts running on numbers. And they need triangles. For animation, for rendering, for physics engines, for AI learning models. Your old friend, the right triangle, becomes the backbone of digital geometry. Games, virtual simulations, architectural models, satellite imaging, all bending space with invisible 3, 4, 5 relationships. You're not just in dusty textbooks now. You're in every phone, every GPS route, every CAD design. A theorem embedded in silicon and light. You've gone quantum. Meanwhile, your name becomes a badge. Pythagorean. It doesn't just mean good at math. It means seeker of hidden truth. The phrase Pythagorean mindset gets tossed around in tech talks, design seminars, and TEDx stages by people who've probably never touched a monochord. But your spirit? Still humming. Still surfacing in every person who looks at a pattern and wonders if it means something more. The beauty of your legacy isn't just that it endured. It's that it multiplied. Adapted. Refracted. Teachers, philosophers, architects, spiritualists, and physicists, each grabbed a piece of you and made it their own. Each kept something alive. Even if they dropped the part about beans. And through all of it, your simple idea, that the universe might be ordered, beautiful, and mathematically sound, never stopped ringing like a soft, eternal note. It echoed. Through temples. Through scrolls. Through silicon. And now, even a child, learning their first proof in a cluttered classroom under flickering lights, gets handed your equation. They don't know your story. Don't know the silence, the exile, the music, the fire. But they draw a triangle. They solve for C. And in that moment, small, frustrated, beautiful, they continue your song. Time passes, and you become less a figure of history and more a symbol, drifting through layers of culture like incense through a temple. You're invoked, debated, reinterpreted, and sometimes just name-dropped for effect. But the truth is, your life, your real life, is mostly forgotten. The edges blurred. The voice lost. What remains is your effect. Because while people may not know your rituals, your aphorisms, or even your name beyond a passing mention in a classroom, they feel your influence. Every time someone constructs a building that won't fall. Every time someone composes a melody that just works. Every time someone looks up at the stars and wonders if it all means something. There you are. You become part of the collective imagination, a shorthand for the mysterious place where reason meets wonder. Where discipline meets magic. It's strange, isn't it? You died centuries ago. Yet you're still useful. Not just for the triangle. Not just for the theorem. But for the deeper message you carried in your quiet walk through the world. That we don't have to choose between the rational and the sacred. That precision and poetry can share the same breath. That math can sing. And that, maybe, just maybe, Truth is a shape waiting to be remembered. Your afterlife is measured in minds sparked, not statues raised. People don't pray to you, but they live by your ideas, even if they don't realize it. Your triangle is used by engineers building bridges in Ghana, by astronauts calculating angles on the ISS, by kids drawing chalk patterns on sidewalks. It's woven into the background of civilization. And sometimes, even now, people rediscover the strange stuff. The harmony of the spheres. The transmigration of souls. The sacred tetractys. They blink, surprised, realizing that you weren't just about sides and squares, that you were chasing something bigger. That your math was merely the key to a door far more mysterious than the numbers themselves. And maybe, in those rare moments when they pause and feel it, when they realize there's a rhythm to the stars, a logic to the beauty, and a music behind the silence, they hear it too. The thing you heard, long ago, when you first listened. That quiet chord resonating beneath all things. Not a scream. Not a command. Just harmony. The one truth you never stopped believing in. And now, it's their turn. Their turn to measure. To question. To listen. To find the shape beneath the chaos. The number behind the noise. The pattern hidden in the pulse. Because though you are long gone, the theorem remains. And somewhere in that equation, you still speak. So now, as the night deepens, and the stars will gently overhead, just as they did in the quiet hills of Metapontum, you can let go of the theorems, the chants, the rules. Let them fade. Breathe slowly. You've walked through a life shaped by symbols, by questions, by the kind of obsessive wonder that makes a man chase numbers across empires. You've wandered sacred temples. You've run from mobs. You've stared into the sky and listened for a hum no one else could hear. And maybe you heard it. Maybe you felt it. That rhythm beneath reality. The soft, steady music of things making sense. And now, as you lie there, eyes soft, breath even, heart slowing with the story, you can drift into that silence. Not because it's empty, but because it's full. Full of everything unsaid, everything unmeasured, everything waiting for someone like you to discover it again. Maybe you'll dream of triangles tonight. Or maybe just stars. Or maybe nothing at all. That's okay. You've earned your rest. The world will keep spinning. The numbers will keep whispering. And somewhere, someone will pick up the chalk, draw that familiar shape, and remember that you were here. That you listened. That you believed. Sleep well, seeker. You did good.